Welcome to WanaxTV Live. In this episode, we talk about the armies of the Trojan War. Before we begin, I'd like to thank to everybody joining us live right now. I'd like to thank to all of the channel Patreons, all of the YouTube members, and of course, all of our subscribers. Also, some credits from today's and the last live episode as well. Special thanks to Introdictor, to Nikolaos for becoming a member, for Hectation or Heckaton, aka Jason, also to Zadeo, aka the linear Bronze Age signs that you see on the screen. Of course, also Lino Benetti and Luis Aldames. Two of these gentlemen are in the chat right now. Interdictor and Luis Aldames, shout out to you. A couple of updates on how we're doing with the current projects at the moment on the channel. As everybody knows, we have been working on the Etruscan civilization documentary for quite some time now. It's been close to 2 years since I have started writing the scenario for it, and we are in the finishing stages right now. We only have a little bit of animation left and music as well. So shortly, let's say in about a month, I think that we're less than a month away from completing and publishing the complete history of the Etruscan civilization. And I've mentioned this so many times, it's going to be the biggest and probably the best quality project, undoubtedly the best quality project that we've done so far on WanaxTV. It will be about 2 hours long. We'll cover the whole Etruscan history, including their origins, their language, their religion, their own mythology. We'll cover how they were seen and perceived by contemporary Greeks and Romans, and their relations with those peoples, as well as with other Italian peoples and other peoples and civilizations across the Mediterranean, all the way from their beginnings to their fall at the hands of the Roman Republic. AR says hello all. Welcome to the episode, AR. Also currently in the works, actually we that's the main reason why we haven't been able to put regular episodes, because all free time, all time for working on the new content has been directed towards the Etruscans. Once the Etruscans are done and published, which I anticipate would be in November, we will be back to either bi-weekly or a 10-day schedule for the regular episodes. Those will be the 10 to 15 to 20-minute episodes, as everybody has been used to for throughout the years on WanaxTV. And of course, we will not cease with these live episodes. I think everybody likes them. We should keep them, and we will go with live stream episodes as well as regular content once the Etruscans are out. The topic of the day, as we have mentioned, is the Trojan War, the armies of the Trojan War, and we will go through the contingents of both Achaeans and the Trojans and their allies as reported in the Iliad by Homer, and also some additional contingents when it comes to the Trojans, Trojan allies to be more specific. But before that, obviously a quick backstory on the Trojan War itself. We are talking about rather Greek mythology in this video, more so than history, more so than documented history. We do know that archaeologically, Trojan War did happen. Troy was in fact destroyed at about 1180 BC, corresponding to the dates provided by Eratosthenes, commonly accepted dates for the Trojan War. I believe it's the starting date is pinned to 1194 and the fall of Troy to 1184 BC by Eratosthenes. Obviously, there are other dates by other ancient authors and writers, but this is the most commonly accepted dating, and it correlates well with the archaeological evidence, which shows destruction of the site we know as Troy 7A archaeologically. It perfectly aligns. And beyond that, unfortunately, we do not know much when it comes to contemporary history and when it comes to archaeological records. Shout out to Odin in the chat. So basically, what happened when it comes to the Trojan War is that Linear B records are gone. They traditionally were not of much use anyway when it comes to recording contemporary events, except perhaps the destruction of Pylos, which was an attack on Pylos was recorded in around 1180/1170, maybe 1175 BC on the Linear B tablets. That was recorded, but beyond that, we do not have any contemporary surviving Linear B records on either Trojan War on or the subsequent fall of the Mycenaean Greek civilization. Shout out to Josh Gardner in the chat. He says, it's a shame for a city to be destroyed multiple times. Well, that's roughly what happened. The city of Troy was not, I wouldn't say it was completely destroyed. If we are each time, obviously it was destroyed in the early 12th century BC, that we do know, but previous destruction and rebuilds, previous layers of Troy, Troy 6, Troy 5, Troy 4. Some of those earlier layers are not well documented, unfortunately, because, well, thanks to Heinrich Schliemann, one of the early archaeologists of the time, late 19th, early 20th century, if I am not mistaken, he he uh, he takes much of credit for discovering the site, but also, unfortunately, during these early archaeology days, um, these early these pioneers were not exactly uh, as professional in handling the evidence as the archaeologists of today, obviously, and a lot of the layers were dug over and destroyed, especially those early layers, without being properly documented. So I believe between Troy 3 and Troy 4, we do not have much evidence other than those layers existed, perhaps some tiny bit of archaeological evidence. So for those reasons, we are not sure if Troy, well, Troy was almost certainly not completely destroyed during either one of those layers. It's just that the layers were built on top of each other. It doesn't mean that each time the city was destroyed. That was my point. So we have Louis Aldamis. It also says something about its resilience, Josh. Well, yeah, but once again, not each and every one of those layers was built as a result of previous destruction. The city was damaged by fire multiple times throughout its history, that we do know, and it did suffer heavy damage in the early 12th century BC archaeological event that we correlate with the historical Trojan War, which we further correlate to mythological story of the Trojan War. That does not mean that the war happened as it was told in the Iliad, as it was told in Greek mythology, but we are not here to debate that or discuss that today. We are simply going to deal with Homer and Iliad and the Homeric sources. We're going to deal with the armies of the Achaeans and the armies of the Trojans and their allies, as it is told by Homer. So it is safe to say that we're dealing rather with mythology today more so than actual history. Shout out to Pyrus in the chat. I'm not sure if this is the first time we see Pyrus. I don't remember seeing Pyrus before, but not in the chat. Maybe as a viewer he was here. But shout out to you, Pyrus. Welcome to the live episode. I have prepared the lists of both Achaeans and the Trojans, and the Trojan allies, of course. So we'll go through that in a bit. Before that, let's see why the Trojan War happened as it was told in the Iliad. Well, the backstory is obviously the divine disagreements about a certain wedding, and a certain apple of discord had three goddesses having an argument amongst one another, and Zeus, not wanting to deal with an argument, delegated a young Trojan prince named Paris to be the judge. And Paris, the three goddesses in question are Hera, who offered Paris to be a king or a ruler of all Asia if he were to select her. We have goddess Athena, and who promised him, I believe, wisdom and so on. And we have Aphrodite. Aphrodite promised him the most beautiful woman in the world, which happened to be Helen of Sparta, married to Menelaus of Sparta, the brother of Agamemnon of Mycenae, the most powerful among the Greek rulers, and the one who bore the title of Wanax or Anax, as opposed to the title of Basileus, which was a lesser royal title at the time and reflected a rather minor regional king, regional dynastic ruler, as opposed to Anax or Wanax, which was the overlord king who was considered to be the first among the Greek rulers. What happened next? I mean, everybody, I'm sure that 99% of the people here knows the story of the Trojan War, so we'll just quickly run through it. So Paris, he goes to Sparta as a part of a diplomatic mission. He meets Helen. He falls in love with Helen. He meets Menelaus as well. Doesn't fall in love with him. He abducts his wife. He runs back to Troy together with Helen. Menelaus is he's more than angry. He goes to his brother Agamemnon at the Mycenaean court. Agamemnon, he doesn't need much persuasion. He declares war on Troy, and he invites all of the Greek rulers to join him and the Mycenaean Achaean army. And the Greek rulers, they do not need much persuasion. Some of them do, actually, such as Achilles, such as Odysseus. Some of them do. Many of them are bound by oath they gave to Menelaus, as at the time that Helen was due to get married, many of the Greek rulers were suitors to Helen, and they all pledged an oath to whoever was selected to be her husband. They would follow him if anything bad happened to them, basically to him. And something very bad did happen to Agamemnon. His wife was abducted. Therefore, another reason for all of the Greek rulers to stand by Agamemnon and sail for Troy. Pyrrhus says, first time on the stream, caught a few videos in the past. Nice. Well, thank you very much for being here. Are you in Greece, or no? Are you in the States or are you in Greece? If you are in Greece, then well done. I know what time it is over there right now. And also, thanks to Luis Aldamis, I know that he doesn't have ideal time in in his place. It's way after midnight. So thank you guys for being here. No, USA. Oh, well, nice to see you here. Advantageous city-states just get used repeatedly, like Carthage, as that was thoroughly depopulated by Rome, but the harbor was too good, so it got rebuilt. That's true. That's true. Odin says Troy was a trading hub, lots of wealth to take. Yes, well, that's correct. We do know that historically, obviously, the story that we just mentioned is a mythological story. I'm pretty sure that most people here agree that Helen and Apple of Discord and Paris supposedly abducting Helen likely did not happen at all, and more than likely did not have anything to do with the actual Trojan War. We do know that historically Troy, or Wilusa as it was known to the Hittites, was fought over numerous times. We do know that the Hittites had ambitions and designs to hold hegemony over the Western Anatolia, and Wilusa was one of the key points for that to be achieved. We do know that Mycenaean Greeks historically had the very same ambitions. They wanted domination and control over coastal Asia Minor, and Wilusa was one of the key points on how to achieve that. Obviously, another one was Arzava, which the Mycenaeans utilized on. They utilized on that alliance for more than a century before Arzava was defeated by the Hittites. And when it comes to Troy or Velusa, it was a trading hub, as mentioned by Odin. It was wealthy. It was on a strategic location between Black and Aegean seas. Lots of wealth to get accumulated over there. And it was fought over mostly by proxy by the Mycenaeans and the Hittites throughout the late Bronze Age. One direct conflict between the two in the early 13th century BC, as recorded in the Tavagalava letter sent by the Hittite king to his Achaean or Mycenaean counterpart. We do not know much besides the fact that the Hittite king acknowledged the past war or hostility between the two powers over Troy, and that at certain point in time, peace was negotiated between the two powers. We do have historical Alexander of Velusa being likely in a center of that struggle or being a result of that struggle, either one of the two, if not both. And we do know that as the Hittite power deteriorated in the later part of the century, Hittites themselves were on a heavy decline by year 1200 BC. They likely did not have anything to do with Western Anatolia at that point. And Mycenaeans started experiencing their own decline, which happened suddenly, roughly at the time or slightly after the archaeological destruction of Troy, once again about 1180 BC. Beyond that, we do not know much historically when it comes to the Trojan War. So we are back to the Iliad and we're back to Homer. We do know that Agamemnon sent ambassadors throughout the Greek world, Greek mainland, Greek islands, Crete, and so on, to invite or persuade, if necessary, all of the rulers to join him on the Trojan campaign. One of the key leaders who needed extra persuasion were Odysseus, who at first started faking insanity, if I believe, until he was revealed to be very sane and then thus forced to join the war. And Achilles, who also did not want to go to the war originally. He was having a great inner struggle about that. His mother did not want him to go. He was presented with two options ultimately. One is to live a normal life, be wealthy, rule his people, rule his land, and live for many years. And as he was passed away, he would be not remembered as a great hero and so on. The other option is a very short life. He would die in Troy, but he would be remembered as perhaps the greatest hero of all. And we know what Achilles chose. He chose the latter. And thus the Mycenaean coalition, the Achaean coalition, was gathered together at Aulis in Boeotia. Before that happened, we do know that Agamemnon, who wanted victory at all costs, he consulted an oracle or a seer, if I'm correct, and he wanted guarantees for his campaign. He wanted guarantees, and the only way he would get those is to sacrifice somebody of royal blood, to make a human sacrifice to the gods, which he did. He sacrificed his own daughter Iphigenia, which for his ruling house apparently is nothing too weird, because we know that the curse of Atreus, the curse of Pelops, run through Agamemnon's royal house deeply, and we're not going to go back to all the atrocities him and his predecessors and his successors did throughout their reigns. It was nothing nice, so we'll just skip that for now. Either way, Agamemnon is compiling a great coalition of over 1,000 ships. Contingents and rulers and kings and princes from all over Greece are joined, and we're going to dive into those contingents. Same with the Trojans. The Trojans are not going to fight the Achaeans alone. They call up their many allies, and we have numerous Trojan allies. Some of them are there from the start, some of them are arriving later throughout the conflict, some of them are arriving very late, too little too late to change anything. So we'll go through all that shortly. With that being said, before we dive into the Achaean contingents, we'll check the chat a little bit because I see we are very active here. Luis Aldames says the legend does not say that Helen was kidnapped. She may well have just fallen in love under the spell of Aphrodite and her sidekick. Yes, you are correct. I didn't say she was kidnapped. She was abducted, and that's slightly different. I would say if she may have decided or been persuaded or fell in love in Paris with Paris as well. Well, apparently she did. So she went with him. But as far as Menelaus and his Greek counterparts were concerned, she was definitely abducted. She was definitely even kidnapped. I doubt that Menelaus ran to Agamemnon and told him, you know what, my wife, she decided to go with Paris in Troy. So what should we do? She was, but yes, you are right, Lewis. You are right. Odin says Bosphorus Strait was the place to be back then. Oh, place to be back then and now, I guess. Yeah, it's even today that's an important commercial route. Hellespont, Jason's path to the Golden Fleece. It was already a legendary route in the days of Hector. Yes, that is true. We do know that Jason went on a huge adventure of his own in a pursuit of Golden Fleece all the way to the edges of the Black Sea. That's a great topic for a future episode. I've been thinking about that for years, and unfortunately, for whatever reason, we're always somehow waiting for a perfect moment that never arrived. But we'll do that. We'll cover that for sure at some point. 100%. It's been on my mind for years. Let me reposition myself a little bit. Okay, this is better. Jason says, Josh Gardner says, it seems like Crimea is important in this area as far as Central Asian goods going west. As far as ancient times, Crimea is also an interesting topic because we have the Bosphorus Kingdom, as already mentioned by somebody, I believe. That's a Hellenic kingdom that survived way after many of other Hellenic polities were subdued by the Romans. So that's a very interesting topic also. Jason says, my hypothesis is that the catalogue of ships represent a very early layer in the text of the Iliad, incorporated because it was very respected in the bardic tradition. I agree with this because we have from from 12, let's say from 1200, roughly 1200 BC till 800 BC, we have 400 years there. So 400, about 400 years of of oral tradition with no writing in Greece, and the catalogue of ships was somehow preserved throughout those times. Whether or not they really had 1,000 ships is difficult to tell. Perhaps some small galleys or so, but they definitely did not bring 50 to 100,000 soldiers to Troy. Historically, I think that would have been very, very difficult to do. And if they were so strong, I can't see how they could fall to anybody except an internal struggle. But that's a whole other black hole we don't want to dive in at the moment. But if you take a look at the catalog of ships, which we will show in this episode, you will see how so many of the settlements are very accurately represented in the catalog of ships. And if everything was pure mythology, that would be very hardly. Let me rephrase that. If if they did not have accurate information about the historical late Bronze Age settlements, which are represented in the catalog of ships, it would have been virtually impossible to compile the list, because we will see that Pylos is the second largest provider of ships. I believe 90 ships, second only to Mycenae, and Knossos is right there with 80. And we do know that historically, besides Mycenae, Pylos and Knossos were two of the biggest and most important palatial centers to the Mycenaeans. But by the archaic times, by the times when Greek alphabet was developed, and subsequently by the times Iliad was written down, Pylos did not even exist as a settled town or city or palace centers. There were only ruins of Pylos at that time. Also, we will notice a few of the several minor settlements which did not exist in the historical times. So all of that knowledge would only be possible if Homer or whoever compiled the Iliad had very very accurate information about those particular subjects, about the settlements and the armies. So either so it must be it must have been very respected and very important in the oral tradition to transmit that information, for that to be transmitted all the way to the 8th century BC. Jason says, after all, the Mycenaeans loved recording lists. That's true. That's absolutely true. And yeah, that's true. And with no writing system, I guess they kept recording it in the historical throughout the Greek Dark Ages. Well, one interesting thing is that even during the Greek Dark Ages, we do know of one particular writing system which did in fact exist during those times, and that's Cypriot syllabary, which was developed roughly in the 11th century BC, or it's roughly dated to as early as 1100 BC. Very interesting. And we do know that Cypriot syllabary, a successor script to the Cyprominoan script, was used by the Greek colonists who arrived to the island, as well as the Etio-Cypriots. So very interesting. Maybe there's something there. Who knows? Have you ever thought of that? And besides, they loved those lists. So who knows? Who knows? The chances are it's just that we do know that oral tradition was very respected, very important to the Greeks. The bards were very respected. They performed throughout the Greek city-states. Even in the Dark Ages, they performed in their own city-states, in their own hometowns and the surrounding locations. More than likely, some of them traveled. So it was very respected, and that's not a phenomenon only um, unique to ancient Greece. A lot of other societies throughout history, even in the later periods, even in the medieval times, did have oral tradition at the times of absence of writing records and did preserve a lot of important information simply by oral tradition, which many of the information was later confirmed to be correct. And we do not have to go far from Greece. We can go to the north, to the medieval states of the Balkans. They had oral tradition as well in the medieval times through during the times of the Ottoman domination, and many of the medieval rulers and so on were preserved orally, and then later later a lot of that stuff was confirmed. Obviously a lot of mythology added as well. What else can you expect? But that's I believe even in other parts of the world we have same concept when it comes to oral tradition and epic poetry. First of all, it's when it comes to epic oral tradition, that's one of the character. It's very important, and memorizing those lines was very important. And bards were very highly valued during those times. Let's see where we are right now with the comments. Luis Aldame says, in any case, it seems to reflect the naval power deployed by each polity. Yes, that's what I was alluding to. Odd to me is that Athens sent only 50. They seem to have comprised only a token force, quote unquote. I don't think it was a token force. I just think that Athens was not as large of a palatial center as Mycenae, Tiryns, and mind you that Tiryns is here a part of the Argives, which includes Tiryns, Argos, Acini, Trojan, and others. So no wonder they were also able to provide 80 ships. But Mycenae, Pylos, even Thebes, Knossos, and others, it is expected for them to provide a larger force than Athens because they were the bigger polities in the late Bronze Age than Athens was. Athens was a medium-sized palatial center. It was bigger than Sparta, for example, and it was bigger than, let's say, Iolcos in Thessaly. I believe Iolcos was the main, the hometown of Jason, Iolcos. So it was also that was also a minor palatial center, a chief Mycenaean outpost in Thessaly at the time. So Athens was perhaps bigger than Sparta and Iolcos, but was not definitely not bigger than Thebes, Pylos, not to mention Pylos and Knossos and others. But yeah, Athens was a second tier palatial center. If you were to put levels on it, let's say. Pyrrhus says, I think there's multiple versions over the years that shift Helen's role in the story. I agree with this. Luis Aldamis, I don't know the difference between abducted and kidnapped. Um, let's see, I'm not 100% sure, but to me, abduction gives a feeling of not necessarily everything being by force and against one's will, as opposed to being kidnapped. But let's see. Let's see. All right, what is the difference between abduction and kidnapping? So there are non-violent abduction cases, which is, I believe, the same, the chief difference to the kidnapping. It says, and I'm just Googling this. Non-violent abduction cases. While many criminal acts of abduction include physical or other violence, there are instances when the person was tricked into going with the abductor. Well, I don't need to go further. So the difference is that the abduction does not have to be by force, it does not have to be by the means of violence, and kidnapping is against someone's will for sure. Abduction, you can persuade or trick somebody to go with you, so maybe that's one of the techniques used by our dear Paris, and therefore he abducted Helen. He did not kidnap Helen, and Menelaus was equally angry, and Agamemnon did not need much persuasion. He probably was judge and the jury at the same time, and he quickly sentenced Paris and all of the Trojans to an Achaean invasion. We have Odin says 1,000 ships over 10 years, maybe. Okay, rounding up. The accountant's tradition of early scribes, okay. Definition of the amount of a woman needs to have to launch one ship, okay. Danny Alex says, hello from Sparta. What was the naval power of Sparta at the time? We are about to find out. So, without further ado, we're going with the Achaean contingents of the Trojan War. You can see them on the screen right now. And as you can see, first of all, we will mention these are mentions by their mentions in the Iliad. So Boeotians were mentioned first by Homer in the Iliad. As you can see, the first column is the line, which is the line in the Iliad where they are mentioned. We are not necessarily going to go by this list because we're going to go with the Mycenaeans first because they are the most important. Mycenae is the hegemon of this whole Achaean slash Mycenaean Greece. And we have Mycenaeans with 100 ships. And Spartans, by the way, Spartans had 60 ships. So that's the answer for Danny, 60 ships provided by Spartans. Thanks, Josh, for the comment. Oh, yes, and Louis Aldames actually answered this way before I did. I just saw it in the comments. Thanks, Louis. Very quick response. Thank you very much. 6 ships by the Spartans. So, as you can see on the screen right now, we have Mycenaean contingent with 100 ships led by Agamemnon, the supreme commander of the campaign, the king of Mycenae. His title was Wanax, or in Homeric speech it was Anax. The W or the gamma, the letter at the beginning, which is pronounced as W, something like this, is lost in most of the classical and archaic era Greek dialects, the only exception being the Arcado-Cypriot, spoken in the mountainous Peloponnesian region of Arcadia and the island of Cyprus. due to their isolation from the others. So therefore they kept the gamma, and they kept using the word Wanax. Rest of the Greeks moved on. They lost the w sound, and they called the supreme king Anax, or anglicized Anax. You can see the cities. We have 100 ships by Agamemnon, supreme commander, and Wanax of Mycenaean Greece. We have Mycenae, obviously his chief settlement, his chief citadel. We have Corinth, Cleonae, Orneae, Sicyon, Hyperseia, Pellene, Aegion, and Helike, and a couple other smaller towns. So as we can see from this list, directly under Agamemnon's control is the region, or are the regions of Mycenae and Cleonae. That's a tiny hillside region which is a part of Argolis on the border with Corinthia. And to the north, we have Corinthia, which consists of Isthmus of Corinth and the city of Corinth, that was also directly controlled by Agamemnon, as well as Sicyon, which is also a tiny transition region between classical Corinth and classical Achaea, a region in the northern Peloponnese. At the time, it was known as Aegialus. So northern Peloponnese and Mycenae was directly controlled by Agamemnon. The rest of Argolis was controlled through, let's call them petty kings, minor kings, or princes. And there were three of them in Argolis: Diomedes, Sthenelus, and Euryalus was not one of the three. So let me quickly check this so we can have accurate one of the, well, either way, it's not as important anyway. So Argos at the time, as some of you know, was ruled by three kings bearing the title of Basileus, so three minor kings. And one of them that was Diomedes, who also was chosen as the commander of the Argive troops. Whether or not he was stationed in Argos or Tiryns, which was a much larger and more important citadel historically, is not directly implied here, but supposedly Tiryns would have had much more power than the city or town of Argos in the late Bronze Age. So I believe Tiryns was the seat of Diomedes. And Argives provided no less than 80 ships, as you can see right here. So besides Mycenaeans and Argives, third we will jump to Pylos, or as you can see, let's double check if you see that on the screen. Yes, you do. You see Pylos, or Messenians, with 90 ships, led by King Nestor, old and wise King Nestor, who was advisor and the right-hand man to Agamemnon. He was not the second in command, however. We'll get to that in a second. So in Pylos, you have all the important settlements of Messenia at the time, and those were Pylos, Arene, Pteleon, Helos, and Dorion, as well as a few of these minor settlements. We're not going to mention every single minor settlement because, as you can see on the screen, there's so many of them. Look at the Boeotians, and that is even without Orchomenus. So look at the number of those settlements in Boeotia. That's way too many for us to go through, so we'll just mention the most important ones. So now we can go back and go by the list, I suppose, because we got the most important out of the way. Obviously, we did not mention Crete, which is on the second page because we have two pages. As you can see, this is the second page. Huge army, so a lot of contingents. So let's mention the Cretans for the sole fact that Idomeneus, the king of Crete, was the second in command of all of the Hellenic, all of the Achaean forces. Idomeneus, he provided 80 ships, which is the third highest amount after Mycenae and Pylos, tied with the Argives. So a very significant army provided by the Cretans. As you can see, the chief settlements are Knossos, the capital of Crete. We have Gortyn or Gortys. We have Lyctos. We have Cretan Miletus, a smaller city, but city after which the much more famous Miletus of Asia Minor was named after, and that was done by the Minoans actually in roughly 2000 BC when they founded the colony at Miletus. We have Lycastus, Phaistos. Phaistos, when it comes to the Bronze Age and the Minoan civilization, the second largest and the second most important settlement on Crete, the second most important palatial center. Not so much in the Mycenaean times. It was still an important city, but it lost the prestige of the second largest palatial center, I believe, and this is the time when the Mycenaean Crete, which is roughly from 1450 till 1200 BC or 1150 BC, that's when the site that we today know as Hagia Triada rose in importance, and we do not know historical name for that settlement. But everybody who's been following our content on the Minoans knows what we're talking about roughly. Also, up to 100 other settlements at Crete, as you can see. So a large force sent by the Cretans. And with that being said, we're gonna go back. We just switched to the page 2 because of the Cretans, because they're very important. Idomeneus being the second in command after Agamemnon. All right. With this being said, we will continue with the contingents from the first page, and then we'll switch to the chat a little bit, and then we'll go to the second page and to the Trojan allies. So we have Boeotians, Boeotia or Boeotia, the region of Thebes, and Orchomenus, but here Orchomenus is mentioned separately from the rest of the Boeotia. So we have 50 ships of 120 men each, and this information is only given to the is only given about the Boeotians, the Thebans. Originally, they were led by Thersander, who was he was killed in action even before the outbreak of the Trojan War. In a sense, before the campaign was launched, there was an early first gathering at Aulis, and I believe Achilles, Thersander, and a few others tried invading Mysia or Phrygia by mistake, according to the story, but that was an early campaign against Mysia or Phrygia, and as a result of that, Thersander was killed in action. That was a campaign by Achilles, and only later, several years later, I think, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, if it's 8 years later was actually the 10-year-long campaign launched from the second gathering at Aulis or Aulis. So from then on, Thebans were led by several princes: Peneleos, Leitus, Acrosilaus, Protoenor, and Clonius. And as you can see, Thebes is the chief city of the Boeotians. We have so many others. I'll mention just a few of the more important ones. We have Aulis, which is the chief port of the region. We have Thespeia. We have Graia. We have Eutresis. We have Thisbe. And we have Arni and others. We have Plataea, let's not forget Plataea, very important historically. Moving on to their neighbors, the minions of Orchomenus also contributed significant force, 30 ships, led by Ascalaphus and his twin brother Ialmenus. Besides Orchomenus, a town under their control was Aspledon. We have Phocaeans, led by Schedius, 40 ships, and Phocaea, as you can see here, we have Crisa and Daulis being some of the chief settlements there, Kyparissus as well. Their neighbors from central Greece, Locrians, led by Ajax or Ajax the Lesser, also 40 ships, also consisting of a lot of tiny small towns, small settlements. No huge settlements here. We have Kinos, Opos, Bessa, and others. We have Euboeans or Abantes of Euboea, led by Elephenor, also 40 ships. And here we have Chalkis and Eretria, two of the chief settlements in the region, two of the cities which would become bitter rivals in the archaic times. And now we have Athenians. Athenians, 50 ships, as we have already discussed, as mentioned by Luis Aldames. Athens and the surrounding communities of Attica were under the control of Menestaius I. As he was killed, the Athenian forces were then led by Acamas and Demophon, who were the sons of legendary Theseus. We have the island of Salamis, only 12 ships, tiny island led by Ajax the Great. We have Spartans or Lacedaemonians, as you can see on the screen, 60 ships led by Menelaus, the brother of Agamemnon and husband of Helen. The chief settlement in Laconia is, of course, Sparta. Besides Sparta, we have Helos, the coastal settlement, Las, Pharis, Amyclae, and others. Amyclae, very interesting city, very important settlement in the archaic times. And there's a very interesting story of the Dorian Spartan takeover of Amyclae, as it was known in the Greek tradition to have historically happened. Whether or not it happened the way it was described in the story is another matter, but something that we will have content about in the future. We are getting to the Arcadians. And let me check how we stand. The Arcadians, the last on this page. The Arcadians are led by Agapenor, 60 ships, and You are probably wondering, how did the Arcadians have 60 ships? They have no coast. The answer is they did not have any of the ships by themselves. They did not have they had 0 ships. These 60 were provided to them by Agamemnon. So they only provided the men for 60 ships. And in Arcadia, we have Arcadian or Comnenus, we have Tegea or Tegea, we have Phaneus, Kylene, Anispi, Ripai, we have Stymphalos. Did I miss any of the cities? We have a few of the minor ones, Parhasia, Strati, and Anispi. Okay, so historically, some of the chief settlements in Arcadia had always been number one, Tegea and Orchomenus, and right after them, perhaps Mantinea. Stymphalus was often considered to be a border between Arcadia and Argolis. We have Claytor, which is not mentioned in this list. It was still it rose to prominence later on, but Arcadians, 60 ships provided by the Mycenaeans, led by Prince Agapenor or Arcadian King Agapenor. Jason says, or Doric, historically developed from Mycenaean as well, presumably talking about the language dialect. But the geographical distribution supports the idea of movement between the Bronze Age and the Archaic period. Luis Aldamis, Arca the Cypriot is direct descendant of what you call Mycenaean. The precursors of other dialects were spoken elsewhere. That is that is obviously it is correct in a sense, but also, Louis, you have to consider the fact that Doric dialect, Doric proper, which was considered to be the dialect of Argolis, Laconia, Messenia, Crete, and Rhodes, was also happened to correspond well with the core Mycenaean area in the late Bronze Age. So perhaps what would be a clean Doric would actually be northwestern Doric, the original Doric, and what we know as Doric proper of Sparta and Argos in classical times is rather a blend of what was left of the Mycenaean Greek speech and a further development of that speech being the coastal area and perhaps intermixture with the Dorians or it's hard to say obviously, but I agree that Cypriots and Arcadians using Digama is a clear sign that they developed away from the late Bronze Age speech the least, because they kept those, and I believe there are, I'm not a linguist, so I can't say off top of my head, but I believe there were some other minor features as well. Obviously, Arcadian dialect was not the same as Cypriot dialect. They did not speak the exact same dialect. They're just grouped together because they were very similar to each other. But on Cyprus they spoke Cypriot, and in Arcadia they spoke Arcadian. It just that they both kind of preserve some of the um, Mycenaean features, so they are called Arcado-Cypriot. Lino Benetti has arrived. Shout out to Lino Benetti. He says, "Oh God, I missed a good part." Well, you missed the introduction part where we were talking about the causes of the Trojan War. We touched historical basis, but we are mostly in the Iliad here. So we're talking about the Homeric causes for the Trojan War. Luzaldame says, Arca the Cypriot was probably spoken in all or most of Peloponnese before the Dorian invasion. Possible, very likely. I would agree with you there because I would not say the only caveat that I would give is that Arca the Cypriot is the closest to the Mycenaean, I would say because of the isolation, not because Dorians spoke completely different dialect and they came and conquered and they imposed their own dialect. I don't really think that happened because, and the reason is, for example, we have a case of Messenia, right? So Messenia was also Doric speaking, and in some Greek sources, you will find criticism of Spartan conquest of Messenia, and they say that it is mentioned that Messenia spoke even a clearer Doric dialect than the Laconians. So we do have clear evidence that Messenia is also considered to be Doric speaking. But Messenia is not very aligned with the Doric identity. Those are Achaeans in charge of Messenia, not the Dorians. So there were big tensions between the native Achaeans and the Dorian tribes of Messenia because the royal house, which was in charge of Messenia, switched to the old Achaean religious practices and disregarded the Dorian ones. They switched to Achaean shrines, Achaean festivals, which were aligned with the Ionian festivals and not the Dorian ones. So clearly, Achaeans were in charge in Messenia and they still spoke quote unquote Doric dialect. And there was no case of Achaeans being subjugated uh, in Messenia by the Dorians or their language or their dialect being suppressed and substituted for the Dorian dialect. It just happened that it was called Dorian, but what I would say is that the coastal regions of Peloponnese, meaning Argolis, Laconia, and Messenia, evolved anyway. It's because they were not isolated, because the speech evolves over centuries, right? So they evolved due to their natural progression, in my opinion, and not because they were suddenly replaced by people who speak differently. Because if they were, we would have Northwestern Doric speakers in Peloponnese, not Doric proper. Doric proper, in my opinion, is a mixture of natural progression, natural evolution of the language, and perhaps some intermixtion you can throw in Dorians and Achaean relations there. But I believe that the reason the reason Arcadians and Cypriots preserved the Mycenaean close to Mycenaean speech is isolation, because we do know that the historical Achaeans of northern Peloponnese also did not have the Gamma, also did not speak Arcado-Cypriot. They spoke their own Achaean/Achaean Doric speech, which is, at least in my opinion, you can have everybody can form their own opinion, uh, is a result of just natural development and evolution of language, as any language in a coastal area changes accepts changes more frequently and faster than in an isolated place such as Arcadia. That's at least what how the things look to me, to be honest. All right. Lino says Arcadia is landlocked land except for a narrow getaway Astros where they could harbor naval forces. Yes, I agree, Lino. It's a kind of a technicality because this area was also claimed by the Argives. And are we talking about the Kineria, which is south to Argolis, between tiny strip between Argolis and Laconia? So that area called Kineria or Cyneria was not always, it was claimed by the Arcadians, but also by the Argives and also later by the Spartans. So it's not really part of Arcadia proper. The precursor of Arca de Cyprid was in any case written in all the Peloponnese and even in Dorian Crete. It was maybe standard Bronze Age Greek. That's what I'm saying, Luis. I think that what would evolve into Doric proper was probably standard Mycenaean Greek, and it was probably very close to Arca de Cyprid at the time, but it just evolved faster because it's a coastal area, and the Digama was present in many dialects, Jason says, notably Aeolian, and there were originally two Digamas, W and Y, but eventually they were not pronounced, in any case of Y rather not written. Helena says, yes, we are Achaeans, always been. That is, we the Messenians. Yes, so the story behind the Messenians is we do know that after the fall of the Mycenaean hegemony, the Dorians, together with the Heraclidae, arrived to the Peloponnese, divided the conquered territory into three parts. Argolis goes to Temenus. Sparta and Laconia go to Aristomachus and actually his two sons, Procles and what is the name of Proclus's twin brother? It doesn't matter, but so they go to the two twin brothers from which we have dual monarchy in Sparta, and the third brother, Cresphontes, he receives Mycenae, but one of his sons decides to disregard the Dorians and switches back to his successor, actually, which we will give me 1 second. He has kind of complicated name, so I don't want to mess it up. I guess it's relevant to the story. Not as relevant to the topic of the day, which is the armies of the Trojan War. So we're gonna go back to that very shortly. All right, so we have. It's okay, we can't find him at the moment, but either way, the son of Crespontes in Messenia, who was also supposed to be a leader of the Dorians, his brothers were killed in a plot organized by another Dorian prince. So he ran to Arcadia. He was saved by the Arcadian king, and he returned. He killed his Doric rival, and he decided he was not going to go with the with the Doric identity. He was not going to go with the Doric rule in Messenia, and he went back to the Achaeans, the people who were supposed to be conquered by the Dorians. So he proclaimed his Achaean identity, and subsequently all of the Messenian kings were Achaeans, and Achaeans were the political class of Messenia, and the Dorians were second class citizens. So that was a big problem in Messenia in the historical times, and that's one of the reasons Messenian war between Messenia and Sparta broke out in the archaic times. So going back to the Achaean contingents, we have page number 2 right here. And we will start with the island of Rhodes. Island of Rhodes, Rhodians led by Tlepolemus, I believe son of Heracles, was he? Yes, he was a son of Heracles and Astyoche, Tlepolemus, the king of Rhodes. And he had 9 ships, so technically he was also Heraclidae, but he was not a part of the Doric linked Heraclidae. So Tlepolemus leads the Rhodian forces. Only 9 ships signifies the um, very small influence. And we have the 3 historical Rhodian cities here: Lindus, Ialissus, and Camerius. We have Simians, the island of Simi, only 3 ships led by Nereus. And then we have a force of Pheidipus and Antiphus, and these are not a specific name given to them, but this is a group of tiny islands in the Deccanese, Callidian islands, the island of Kos, Kassos, Karpathos, which is to the east of Crete, and Nisyrus. And then we are arriving to the Achaean forces led by Achilles himself, 50 ships, the same amount as provided by the Athenians. And Achilles' forces are his famed Myrmidons, one of the some of the greatest warriors in all of Greece at the time. Besides Myrmidons, we have Achaeans, we have Hellenes, and we have Pelasgians. I'm not sure if Pelasgians are specifically mentioned as soldiers. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, or they are only mentioned in the context of Pelasgic Argos, of that being a Pelasgian area. But that's a question. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I can't really remember. But we have Pelasgic Argos, which is either a city or a general region. We have Alos, Alopi, Thrakis, and Phthia. Phthia being the home of Achilles. After Achilles was killed in the Trojan War, his forces were led by his son Neoptolemus. We have the neighboring Pteleon and Phylaki, and these forces, 40 ships, led by Protesilaus and later by Podarches. Then we have the This is a Thessalian area of how it was known in the late Bronze Age. It was Aiolis. So this area, it says no name given, led by Eumelus. The chief cities are Pherai, Boebi, and Iolkos. So this area was known as the original Aiolis in the late Bronze Age, and based on this Aiolis, we have the Aiolis of Asia Minor, the coastal area which the Aeolians colonized. They first moved to Boeotia as they were kicked out at the time of the Bronze Age collapse, and according to the tradition, they were led by some of the Achaean leaders, namely Gras and others, into Aiolis, where they founded the city of Kymi, the Mytilene and Metimna on the island of Lesbos, and so on. Either way, moving on, we have Philoctetes with 7 ships, with 50 oarsmen each, who were also archers. Later, the force was led by Medon, and that is the area in Thessaly. It's Methone, Maliboea, and Olizon, as well as Thaumakia. Also, another area of Thessaly, Podarilius, is the leader 30 ships, the cities of Thrica, Ithome, and Oichalia. We have yet another Thessalian region without a specific name, led by Euripylus, and this is the area of Hypereia, also settlements of Asterius, Titanus, and Ormenius, 40 ships. And now we have the legendary Lapiths, the tribe of northern Thessaly, led by Polypoetes and Leonteus, also 40 ships. Their chief settlement is Argissa, which is, I believe, either very close to or a part of the site of classical Larissa in Thessaly, today's chief Thessalian city. Also the sites of Olosson, Gritoni, Orte, and Eloni. And we have 22 ships provided by Guneus, the leader of 2 tribes, Enianes and Parabeans. And their chief cities are Gonos, Kyphos, and Dodona, but this Dodona, which you see is not the religious center of Epirus, is the Thessalian Dodona. And we have Magnetes of the Magnesia, led by Prothous, 40 ships, and the Peneus and Mount Pelion is their region. So a lot of different factions in the region of Thessaly, as you can see. And this sums up the grand total of over 1,000 ships. There were different estimates and hypotheses of how many men that amounted to. Not going to take a guess, but we have over 1,000 ships here. And with that being said, we will go back to the chat for a second before switching to the Trojan side. The Trojans also brought their allies. They did not defend only by themselves. Hackathon says, actually, let's see what's happening here. Yanis is in the chat. Shout out to Yanis. He says Achaeans are those who descend from Achaeus, brother of Ion or Ion. So the Achaeans spoke Ionian like the Athenians. Well, Yanis, the thing with that speech, Ionian speech, is that it was not called Ionian back in the late Bronze Age, so that's hard to say. I think that they were, I suppose, close to Ionians. Ionians as a tribe, they originate from northern Peloponnese, I believe, from where they were kicked out by the Achaeans, according to Greek tradition, when the Achaeans moved in after much of Peloponnese being conquered by Dorians. So I think it's a really a never-ending black hole of theories. So Lino Benetti says, "You are right, Wanax Bullseye, Kinuria, it's a country of Arcadia, always been seeking provincial status." Yes, so it has always been a separate region from Arcadia, but usually it was originally, I guess, considered a part of Arcadia because Kinurians were also, I think, according to Greek mythology, considered to be autochthonous to the region and of the same race as Arcadians, and they go all the way back to the autochthonous king Pelasgus and the Pelasgians, I believe, if I'm correct, by the mythological accounts. So yes, they did have the Arcadian link. They were often considered a part of Arcadia, but they were not Arcadia proper. So Kinurians, they were also claimed by Argos and later by Sparta when Sparta expanded. By they were also claimed by Argos, not only but by Arcadia. But they themselves, they considered themselves independent of Arcadia. They considered themselves sharing the same lineage, I suppose, but not a part of Arcadia. They were not controlled by any Arcadian entity. Yanis says the Arcadian spoke Aeolic just like the Cypriots. Luis Aldamis says, what I mean is that quote unquote brother in that legend means brother in Greekness, different in subpopulation. I'm not sure what the topic of discussion here is. We have three cities, three ships each, token force. Well, some of those were very tiny. For example, the Simians, that's a tiny place. They can't provide more. It's Rhodians only nine, so either Rhodes was smaller than it was in classical times, or they really provided a token force. Oh, let's not forget Cyprus, which is not mentioned here. Let's not forget that Agamemnon requested a fleet from Cyprus as well. And the king of Cyprus provided him, I believe it was Agamemnon requested 50 ships, and the Cypriots provided one ship and 49 clay toy ships. And as a result of that, Agamemnon, I believe he cursed the king of Cyprus. So almost forgot. Yes, Cyprus sent one ship as well. That's a token force. Uzadami says Pelasgians slash Peleset, primarily from Thessaly. Santiago is in the chat. Shout out to Santiago. He says in ancient Greek education, this must have been like memorizing the capital cities, maybe. Yanis says the inhabitants of Argos were Danaans, so they spoke Dorian. Well, Danaans are Danaans. They are not Dorians and Danaans are not the same. Did Nestor contribute 90 ships? Yes, he did. 90 ships from Pylos. Thessaly contributed almost half of the force. Well, I'm not sure about that because they maybe, but let's not forget that in Peloponnese, Mycenae is separate from Argos, while in reality it was likely a part of the same polity. So, well, part of the same palatial center, or should I say, so if you add Argives and Mycenaeans, that's 180 ships. But yeah, let's see, 40 ships, 22, 40, 40, 30, 7. Yeah, a lot of ships coming from Thessaly. Jason says, yes, I don't know if the Trojan War stories came first or not, but it is tempting to say that this was a list of cities, then names of eponymous heroes became attached to them, and then the list was worked into narrative. I agree with this. I think that this list was possibly historical when it comes to the name of the locations, because this was not something that could be randomly made up. Names of the leaders, amount of ships, that can change, I suppose, throughout the centuries, that can be added and removed according to the story. But the vast majority of these locations, of these cities, it's very difficult to know those unless you have access to accurate information. And the only way one could have access to correct information, I suppose there's no other way than oral tradition. The only like alternative scenario where I could see 1% of a chance that could be somehow preserved because it's a list and we know how the linear B writers loved the lists, could be through the Cypriot script, which was also a linear script, the Cypriot syllabary. But I would go with oral tradition for sure. It just something that came to my mind during this episode. Um, so Luis Aldames says Danaans probably meant Greek. I think we went over these name theories when it comes to the three synonyms being Achaeans, Danaans, and Argives. Achaeans was likely, well, definitely the name of the tribe and likely the name of the country based on the tribe because we know that in the Hittite sources they clearly say Ahiawa, and in the early Hittite language they say Ahia. So first, when we have Atarsia of Ahia and the indictment of Madhuwata, which is about 1400 BC, Mycenaean Greece is called Ahia in Hittite language. Only later, when with their phonetic changes, when early Hittite uh, uh, transition into later Hittite language, we have a wa addition in the end. So it's not Ahia, it's Ahiawa. Lino Benetti, it should be noted that the ships back then were just for trade and moving forces around, not for naval battles like the triremes later on. Please correct me if I am wrong. I will correct you, and Luis Aldames already did. We have a few records of naval battles in late Bronze Age. One being the Battle of the Nile Delta, another one being a naval battle of Suppiluliuma II against the Alaesian Cypriot forces during the early part of his reign. So he had to defeat them in the naval battle, and then he landed on Cyprus, and then the Alaesia acknowledged Suppiluliuma II as they accepted their vassal status to the Hittites. As soon as he left it appears that the Alassians went independent again, but they were quickly overrun by the Sea Peoples. So we have those two naval battles, and those naval battles were recorded by land powers. Egypt was a land power. Hittite Empire was a land power, and Mycenaean Greece was a naval power. Minoan Crete before them was a naval power. So for sure, they Mycenaeans would have been better versed in naval battles than the Hittites, and we have depictions of the naval battles in the frescoes of Akrotiri, I believe. So maybe not historically recorded as in forms of uh, of written record of what actually happened, but we do have depictions of naval battles all dating to the Minoan Crete era. So Mycenaeans for sure had a lot of naval battles throughout late Bronze Age. That's for sure. Yeah, and let's not forget we have records in the indictment of Maduwata dated to 1400 BC that Atarsia, Achaean leader, was joined by Maduwata and another regional ruler in his raids against Cyprus. So many of this, it's not explicitly said that there was a naval battle, but you can see that the Mycenaeans were very strong when it comes to seafaring. So it's presumed that they did have a lot of naval battles at the time, not simply to transport troops. If anybody, if the Hittites had naval battles and the Egyptians had naval battles, Mycenaeans, who were clearly superior on the sea, must have had a greater history of naval battles than those two powers. So there's the answer. Lino Benetti says, not a naval battle per se, very shallow waters, archers on the riverbank. Yes, that is true about the Battle of the Nile Delta, but there was a naval battle, you can look it up, between Shupiluluma II and the Alassian Cypriot Navy. And he had to defeat them on sea first to be able to land on Cyprus, and then he defeated them on land. If you want me to, I can find this for you. I remember when I was doing a video on the Bronze Age history of Cyprus, I researched this material. So if you check that video, you might find that battle. So that was a proper naval battle, which was recorded. Yanis says, Iason or Iason in Greek means healer. The Ionic form of word means Jesus, with pronunciation A in Iolic and Doric as E in Ionic. Okay. Thucydides said the sea battled standing on firm land, and they conducted ground operations while abroad battleships meant it was not an open sea clash. Well, you have a point when it comes to open sea battles. I'm not sure there are no clear records. I mean, even in the historical times, they kind of avoided open sea battles. Usually it was a sea battle close to some coast or close to an island or close to something. They did happen, but going back to the Bronze Age, yes, logistically it would have been very risky. It doesn't mean that they did not happen, because when we are dealing with the naval powers such as Minoans, such as Mycenaeans, there were probably naval battles even in open sea. If if not against other military power, then against a group of pirates. We know that piracy was very active and going rampant in late Bronze Age. We do know the Sea Peoples. We also do know that Luca lands, the Lycians, were pirates. And we do know that Mycenaeans built their empire on their sea prowess. So they were many of the Mycenaeans were pirates as well. So they must have been well versed in the naval battles, even in open sea. So that's that's a presumption based on their naval pedigree. And once again, we do have depictions, frescoes of naval battles. Luis Aldamis, the sea is very big, difficult to meet the enemy unless close to a land target, really. That's true. That's why even in the classical times, the vast majority of the naval battles happened close to a coast or an island or something that could pin down either force. Josh says, damn pirates. Okay, so moving on from naval battles to the Trojan list, known to us as the Trojan battle order. We have Trojans and their allies, and I have made an addition of the forces of the Trojan allies, which were not mentioned in the Iliad but were mentioned in other sources of epic poetry of the Trojan epic cycle, Homeric cycle. And with no further ado, we go to the Trojan battle order. We have the Trojans led by Hector, and just a note: we do not know number of ships. Obviously, they were defending their lands for the most part, so many of them did not use ships. They were there. They arrived to Troy to defend it on land. So there are no ships here, just identity of the contingents, their leaders, and the settlements they came from. So the first five are essentially the Trojans from different areas. We have, and I believe the first five contingents that you see were all a part of one single big defending force, which was led by Hector himself. And the wings were led by the other leaders, which you can see represented here on the screen. So the major Trojan contingent, the defenders of Troy, led by Hector himself, the supreme commander of all the Trojan forces. And when I say the Trojan forces, I mean the first five contingents that you see on the screen. Hector was not the leader of Trojan allies. Trojan allies came with their own leaders to assist their allies. They were not uh, subservient to Hector or anybody else. They could just decide to go home whenever they wanted. For example, Sarpedon of Lucia, he was not subordinate to Hector except for maybe coordination with the Trojans. Hector was the main defender. So maybe in that sense, but he did not take orders from Hector, and neither did Phorcys and Ascanius from Phrygia, neither did Nastes from Miletus. None of these guys. Completely different situation compared to the Achaeans. We do know Achaeans. Agamemnon is supreme commander of all of the Achaeans, so everybody takes orders from Agamemnon. Here, only the first five contingents. So Trojans, Dardanians, Trojans of Mount Ida, Trojans of Adrestea, and Trojans of Arispe, Abydos, and Percote. So they were under Hector. The rest of the allies were not under Hector per se. So Trojans, Hector representing the city of Troy, the city of Ilion, the citadel itself. We have Dardanians led by Aeneas, Acamas, and Archelochus, and they came from Dardanos. And Dardanos also shared the same royal dynasty as the Trojans. Those were the two branches of the very same royal dynasty, Dardanians and the Trojans, all tracing their lineage from mythical king called Dardanus. So, so Dardanians, Aeneas, for example, was a cousin to Hector. Archelochus and Acamas, two of the other Dardanian leaders. So Dardanians were basically Trojans. Those were the same people. Dardanians, Trojans, Trojans of Mount Ida, those were all the same people belonging to the same country. You could say that the city of Troy was the chief city of Troad, and these five contingents were from the different areas of Troad. Dardanians obviously hailing from Dardanus, led by Aeneas, Archelochus, and Acamas. We have Trojans of Mount Ida, which is a mountain right next to the city of Troy. So on Mount Ida, there was another, tied to Mount Ida was another settlement called Zelea, which is not on the mountain itself, but that contingent was represented by Pandarus. And then we have Trojans from two more Trojan contingents. One contingent represented the cities of Adrasteia, Apaisos, Pityeia, and Mount Terea. This contingent was led by Adrestus and Amphius. And then the fifth contingent, representing the settlements of Percote, Practius, Cestus, Abydos, and Arispe, led by Asius. So these these five contingents are a part of the same Trojan army led by Hector. Then we have the Pelasgians, who, as you can see, were also spearmen, led by Hippothous and Pelias from the city of Larissa. Not no exact no particular identification is gave to Larissa. Larissa is a common name, I believe, meaning citadel. It's a common Pelasgian common name for Pelasgian settlements, Larissa. It is believed by the scholars to come from originally a Pelasgian term for a citadel, and it just meant citadel. So, but that is just a hypothesis. We are not 100% sure. Either way, this Larissa is usually associated with the Aeolian, the not Aeolian, the Aeolis Aeolis settlement of Larissa, which is close to the city of Kimi, which is what the Aeolian colonists defeated before founding the city of Kimi. They defeated the natives first, and their chief city was Larissa. They defeated the Pelasgians, and they founded the city of Kimi, the chief city of historical region of Aeolis in Asia Minor. So this Larissa was a chief Pelasgian settlement, and it was led by Hippothous and Pelias. We have Thracians bounded by the Hellespont. So this is eastern coastal Thracia, led by Acamas and Perios. We have the Cicones, who are also linked two Thracian tribes uh, Thracian tribes. No settlements stated. We do know that Cicones were from coastal Thracia, from northern Aegean, and Euphemus was their leader. We have Paeonians, the archers from quote unquote far away. Pyraichmes was the leader, and Asteropius was also recognized as a leader in Book 11. And their chief city was Amydon on the Axius River. And Paeonia is a region to the north of Macedonia. So Paeonia is located where today's Republic of North Macedonia is located, roughly. That would be the location. So, and Paeonians were a tribe living in north of the Greeks in classical times as well. So, Paeonia, for whatever reason, sided with the Trojans, and they were led by Pyraichmes originally. We have Paphlagonians, a region, coastal region of Anatolia, northern coastal region. I believe corresponding to the region of Pala in the Hittite sources of the Late Bronze Age, led by Pylaemenes of the Eneti. Eneti were the tribe which inhabited the region of Paphlagonia, and we have their cities listed here as well. Kitoros, Sesamus, Cromna, Aigialus, Erythini, and also a region by the river, Parthenius. We have Halizones from far away. Halizones were led by Odius and Epistrophus, and they came from Alibi. And it is not, even the ancient Greek scholars were not in complete agreement where this region was. It is believed that it's on the far eastern shores of Black Sea, so somewhere close to the region of Halkis, perhaps to the south of Halkis, possibly, Halizones. And Alibi is sometimes associated to historical Halibi by the ancient Greek scholars, ancient Greek writers, which is roughly in that area. It's northeastern Anatolia slash Caucasus region, close to where Halkis is. So then, moving on from the Halizones, we have Mysians or Mysians, the region of Mysia or Mysia, in the Hittite sources known as Massa, led by Chromis and Enomus. So this is a region between Troad and Phrygia. This is uh, this is a region to the east of Troad, to the east and spanning all the way to the southeast of Troad. Not a small region for sure. Forces led by Chromis and Enomus, and Mysians are considered to be somewhat somewhat closely related to the Phrygians. And now we have the Phrygians also, led by Phorkys and Ascanius, and they came from the region of Ascania. So Ascania is to the south of Gordian, which is the capital of historical Phrygian kingdom. So when it comes to the Phrygians, they were scattered across several regions, one being the Sangarius River, which is, let's say, Phrygia proper. This is where Gordian is, Ancyra, Midian and other chief Phrygian cities in central towards the central Anatolia. We have a little bit towards the coast. We have Ascania. So it's Ascania is between Troad and Phrygia proper. It's closer to the coast. I believe there's a Lake Ascania, which is kind of close to the northwestern Anatolian coast, a little bit to the east of the region of Troy. So this is where I believe I originally said it's to the south of Phrygia proper, which is not true. It's Acmonia. That's another Phrygian region, Acmonia, which is a little bit to the south, also inland, and Ascania is to the north of Acmonia and to the west of Gordian. So Ascanian Phrygians arrived led by Phorkys and Ascanius. We have Myonians, also later known as the Lydians, led by Mestles and Antiphus. Their location is listed under Mount Tmolus, so no further identification here besides the name Myonians, which is connected to the historical Lydians. Also, we have Carians, led by Nastes and Amphimachus, from the city of Miletus, which used to belong to the Mycenaeans, but they were expelled towards the late part, towards the end of the 13th century BC historically, and here in the Homeric story of the Trojan War, Carians are inhabiting Miletus as their chief city, and they are led by Nastes and Amphimachus. And finally, Lycians from quote unquote far away, led by Sarpedon, and after his death, led by his second in command, Glaucus. And their region is listed as Xanthus River. We do know the city of Xanthus was there as well, called, I believe, Arna in the native Lycian language. I'm not sure, but when I say I'm not sure, I am pretty sure, but I do not want to be quoted on that just in case I made some mistake. But I think it's called Arna in native Lycian language. Either way, we know it as Xanthos. All right, so and also let's not forget that we have a few other constituents of the Trojan alliance, and those are not mentioned in the Iliad by Homer, but they are mentioned elsewhere in the epic cycle. And we are talking about four more contingents which arrived to Troy in the later parts of the war. We have Thracians of Rhesus, the king of Thracians, presumably the city of Ion was associated with Rhesus and his Thracians. Obviously, Thracia is not a single kingdom. It's not a single unity. We already had two Thracian groups. We had the Thracians bounded by the Hellespont, led by Acamas, and we have the Cicones, which were typically considered to be a Thracian tribe or a Thracian related tribe led by Euphemus. And the third contingent is led by Rhesus, who did not end up taking part in the defense of Troy. He was killed by Odysseus. We have Trojan allies who have arrived to Troy. It was very late, but they have arrived. We have Amazons, led by Penthesilea. Her location is Themyscira by the Black Sea. She, of course, met similar fate to her predecessor Hippolyta, who was killed by Heracles in Greek mythology. Penthesilea fell by the hand of Achilles. Same happened to the king of the Ethiopians, Memnon. Ethiopians also arrived to help the Trojans in the later part of the war. Memnon, known as the Great Warrior, and his battle against Achilles was epic. I believe Zeus was waging on a scale of who will prevail. Eventually, Achilles prevailed and killed Memnon in battle. Ethiopia, linked by the Greeks. Originally, I believe in the Homeric sources, the the exact location of Ethiopia is not explicitly mentioned. It's not specifically mentioned, I'm sorry. It's but later sources associated that to the land south of Egypt and closer to the region of today's Ethiopia. And last but not least, we have a contingent led by Eurypylus or Eurypylus, the contingent of Keteioi, which we had in the previous episodes theorized about their possible theoretical links to the historical Hatti, the Hittites. Eurypylus's father was Telephus, very close to Telepinu, the Hittite historical king and god of the Hittite pantheon. Either way, Greeks considered the Keteioi to be from Mysia. They considered them to be Mysians, a Mysian tribe, and Eurypylus was also killed during the Trojan War. And this completes the whole Trojan battle order plus the 4 contingent I added, which Rhesus's Thracians, Amazons, Ethiopians, and the Keteioi, which were not mentioned by Homer but were mentioned in other sources of the epic cycle, for example, Ethiopis and others, and were thus as relevant as those mentioned in the Iliad as considered by the classical Greeks. Either way, the result of the Trojan War, as we all know, is Achaean victory, Trojan defeat, death of most of the Trojan heroes and rulers and princes and leaders, and many of the Mycenaeans as well. But in the end, Trojan horse was activated and it brought Achaeans the upper hand. Troy was burned to the ground, and Agamemnon returned with his brother and with Helen to Greece in victory. All right, with this being said, we have a lot of activity in the chat still. Shout out to everybody that's online and in the chat right now. We have Luis Aldames, perhaps talking about his maternal family legend, if I'm correct, or if this is not a quote from something else. Oh, modern heraldic legend. Okay, yeah. We have Yanis talking about the Venetians, modern Venetians. It's just that Homer doesn't pronounce the digama, while the modern Italians pronounced it in the Doric way, like V. Luis Aldames says, Phrygians. I'm surprised they were in historical Phrygia and the Hittites never mentioned them. So the Hittites indeed never mention Phrygians by that name. They do mention a bunch of regions in northwestern Anatolia which were outside of their control. So perhaps one of those regions were corresponded to what ancient Greeks called the Phrygians. Let's see. Is Phrygi did the Phrygians themselves use the name that name for themselves, or they just went by the name of their capital city, which was Gordian? I believe that they associated themselves with Gordian more, their capital city. But let me double check this. This is now a very relevant. So, if I am correct, name Phrygians was mostly used by the Greeks. But actually, yes, I'm sorry. It was used by the Phrygians as well. The Greeks recorded Phrygoi and Brigoi, and the whole change from Brigoi to Phrygoi when they moved to Anatolia. So presumably they did identify themselves as Phrygians as identification of their people. But when it comes to their polity, I believe, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, they associated their polity, their kingdom, with their capital city, which was Gordian. And it is unknown how the Hittites referred to the Phrygians. So there's no Hittite record mentioning the Phrygians, but perhaps they still inhabited one of those areas that the Hittites did not control. And let me pull that pretty quick so we can discuss which potential areas are those. Let's see. Let me just take a look at the. All right, so we have a few regions such as Arvana, such as Kalasma in the north western Anatolia, which the Hittites considered to be outside of their control, outside of their zone of influence. And we have, it is unknown how the Hittites referred to the region of the Sangarius River, which is all the way to the north west. So the region of the Sangarius River is the core region of the historical Phrygians. This is where Median, Gordian, and other Phrygian cities were located, and the main base of their population. So it is unknown how the Hittites referred to that area. It doesn't mean that the Phrygians were not already there in the late Bronze Age. It just the Hittites never mentioned them, and they were likely not very relevant also. Jason says the Phrygian language was very similar to early Greek. Some inscriptions can be understood if familiar with Linear B inscriptions and ancient Greek in general. I agree with this. Uh, the Phrygians had some very some features to their language that were very characteristic to the ancient Greek features, and they did use some of the words, especially when it comes to the royal titles and stuff, that were known to be exclusive to the Mycenaean Greeks. For example, we do know that Wanax and Lavagetas were Mycenaean Greek titles, one meaning the king, the high king, and another designating either a leader of the people slash the chief commander or or somebody second to Wanax, and we do have a historical Phrygian inscription in Phrygian language saying, I believe, Midai Vanaktai Lavagetai, which means Midas, the leader of the people and king. He used the same Mycenaean titles of the late Bronze Age, Vanaktai, which is Vanakt, Wanax, and Lavagetai, which meaning of Lavagetas. So he used the Wanax and Lavagetas for himself. Midas, historical king Midas of the 8th century BC. And this king Midas, historical ruler of Phrygia, I believe he was the final king of independent Phrygian kingdom before it was overrun by the Cimmerian invasion of the north. His wife was Harmodike, who was a princess from the Greek city of Kyme, the daughter of historical king Agamemnon of Kyme in the 8th century BC. So yes, Phrygian was apparently very closely related to Greek. Uh, Whether or not it could be understood by the Greeks is a question. I'm not sure about that. I don't think so. But even ancient Greek writers noticed some similarities, many similarities between Greek and Phrygian language, and they commented on those similarities. It would take me a minute to find that right now. But actually, let's do that. Let's do that. Phrygian language. Let's double check on that. Very interesting topic, perhaps deserves an episode on itself. And we do know that Phrygian alphabet was very similar to Greek alphabet and almost exactly the same as the Eastern Greek form of alphabet used in the region of Aeolis, such as city of Kyme, and it is believed that Princess Harmodike, the Queen of Phrygia, was instrumental in its development in Phrygia and either based on or developed in parallel with the the ancient Greek alphabet, but likely based on ancient Greek because ancient Greek city-states were coastal areas and thus had easier access to the alphabet. We know that they developed that based on the Phoenician alphabet, and they did trade a lot. The coastal Greek city-states of Asia Minor did trade a lot with the Phrygians, as well as those in Cyprus, and that's how the ancient Greek alphabet was developed. And I believe that it is believed to be developed around the year 800 BC and Phrygian alphabet a little bit later during the reign of historical Midas, 700 something BC. So there you go. Okay, and eventually in Phrygia during the Hellenistic times, Phrygian alphabet was replaced with the Greek alphabet. So they used to they in the Hellenistic times they began inscribing the Phrygian language on straight Greek alphabet. So it was related to the Greek language. The Phrygian language was. There was recently an epigraphic find in that area claimed to be a distinct Anatolian Indo-European language. There's no room for the Phrygians before the Trojan War in Anatolia, in my opinion. It's possible. I mean, they are recorded in the catalog of ships as allies of the Trojans, and they are recorded to be from Ascania, which is a lake area, a region of a lake to the east of Troy. So I assume that would not be far from the historical truth, just based on the general accuracy of the catalog of ships. But then again, when it comes to the Trojan allies, it gets a little bit foggy when it comes to whether this has some correlation with actual history or not. It just too much speculation. But I would suppose that some of the tribes belonging to the Phrygian people would have been in Asia Minor, in the region of the Sangarius River, and in the region of Lake Ascania, even before the historical Trojan War. Because the Hittites never recorded who exactly inhabited those areas. Um, they recorded the regions of Kalasma and others which were bordering to the regions which Hittites had influenced over, such as let's see that I don't want to make a mistake, such as regions of Cassia, Hulana. Those regions Hittites at least claimed to had control over, and then further to the northwest we have Kalasma and Arwana, but those were still not on the Black Sea coast. And as you go further to the coast of the Black Sea towards the northwestern edge, you get to the Sangarius River Valley, and the Hittites never made any comments about who lived there. And in historical times, that's the core base of the Phrygian population. So I would assume that the Phrygians, early Phrygians, still lived in those areas even in the late Bronze Age, or at least in the later part of the late Bronze Age. Luis Aldames, in my opinion, Greco-Armenian, including Phrygian, derives from Vucedol culture, but two distinct migrations separated by almost 1,000 years. Santiago says, I thought that Wanax meant YouTube content creator. Well, okay, yeah. Fletcher says, Midas is credited with refining silver and gold from electrum. The real tomahawk is in the chat. He says the Frisian army might be related to the people of the corded ware. Luis Aldames, Vucedol culture, which derives from Western Yamna. Okay, now we're talking about prehistory. I'm not an expert here, so just so you know. Luis Aldames, I think that the Phrygians were then in Macedonia and crossed into Asia with only with the Trojan War. Then they shifted sides and destroyed the Hittites. Well, the Brigis, who are presumably the same people as the Phrygians, as recorded by the ancient Greeks, and I believe that these sources are not contradictory. The contradictory that all of the sources that mentioned Brigis always associate them with the Phrygians, so there should not be there's no contradiction there, presumably true, because we do not know Phrygian language of the Brigis. So we do not have records of the Brigian language, accept toponyms such as Edessa and others, which are believed by modern scholars to be related to the Phrygian language. So it is safe to say that the Brigis and Phrygians are very related, originating from the same people. And you can see the last regular WanaxTV episode that we did about 2 months ago. It's on the history of the Brigis, so check that out. With that being said, yes, they did inhabit, the Brigis did, the region of Macedonia, the region of Halkidiki, the Mount Holomon, the region of Mygdonia on Halkidiki, the small region of northern Epirus, and their chief city was called Brygias or Brygion. It was on the it was located close to the Ohrid Lake. So, so those were the chief Brygian areas of settlement, and also there was a Brygian settlement in Illyria. Also, they were just scattered around, presumably as a result of late Bronze Age migrations. There was a Brygian settlement to the north of Epidamnus in the coastal settlement in Illyria, and there were, I believe, epitaphs in Epidamnus itself, which mention the name Brigos, son of Aphrodisias, if I'm correct. So they did leave traces, and they are connected to the historical Phrygians. They did have some history of their own. The Brigis did. So that's there's evidence of Phrygians moving from those areas. Now, when it comes to their passing through Thracia and then settling in what would become the historical Phrygian region, the evidence becomes less clear because they only emerge with the emergence of ancient Greek alphabet. So in the Greek Dark Ages, it's also Dark Ages from the Phrygians. We do not know much about them. The only thing that we do know is that their kingdom is slowly developing. We know that historical King Midas is a son of historical Gordius, and that Phrygians during those times, historically, in the 8th century BC, by the 800 BC, did control area from Halys River all the way to Aiolis, the coastal Anatolian region of Aiolis to the west, and the kingdom of Lydia to the south. So they did have a significant kingdom of central Anatolia, the biggest, the biggest kingdom in all of Anatolia were Phrygians at one point in time, and they did not just spawn there. They slowly developed during the Dark Ages, just like everybody else, and presumably they would have to have some kind of base from where they spread out. And unfortunately, the Hittite sources do not mention them. Unfortunately, the Hittite sources do not mention the historical Phrygian core, which is the Sangarius River by the Black Sea. So there's just no evidence. There's just evidence that they left for Anatolia at unspecified time between the end of the late Bronze Age and some time in Greek Dark, between late Bronze Age and end of the late Bronze Age. That's what we know for with some certainty. Everything else is just speculation. So my personal, if you're asking me for a personal speculation, I would speculate that Phrygian tribes or Phrygian polities or Phrygian settlements existed along the Sangarius River Valley even before 1180 BC. So I would say that they likely existed there since at least 13th century BC. That would be my speculation, not based on any evidence, concrete evidence. So we are at 2.5 hours right now, so it's probably time, just about time to wrap it up. We have Real Tomahawk saying Yamnaya, Greek, and Anatolia are related. Jason says, I just remembered years ago when I first looked at some Phrygian epigraphy, I was surprised that it was easy. It was just as easy slash difficult as Linear B with knowledge of Greek. Yeah, the Phrygians must have crossed from further west through Thracia and Dardania into Anatolia during the Bronze Age. Louis Aldamis, it's not just the Brigis slash Phrygians, but the derived Mushki slash Armenians. Armenian and Greek consistently cluster, even if not too close. Yes, so the thing with Armenian is, yeah, there is a hypothesis of shared Armenian, uh, Phrygian, and Greek proto language, I suppose. But and do not take me as some kind of authority here because I'm not an expert in languages and linguistics. Just as an observer, it doesn't look to me that Armenian is closely related to Greek at all. It just looks very different. When I take a look at the similarities between Greek and Phrygian on some basic level, it looks like kind of it looks related. For example, if you go to if you check some of the many of the words in Phrygian and Greek are exactly the same. Many of the words are very, very similar, almost as if it's another dialect. But one all intonation and melody of the language is also important when one speaks it. So that's why some of the Greeks couldn't understand the different dialects. But when it comes to Phrygian, I can see some similarities on that basic level. But when it comes to Armenian, there's none of that. So I assume that if Armenian was distantly related to Greek, going back way, way in the past, it would have been less related to Greek than Phrygian is. Just my opinion based on observation of a non-linguistic expert. Luis Aldami says, even genetically, Armenians have many terminal branches of volcanic R1b. Okay, we're talking about DNA here. Okay. Yanis says, 1x means something like the emperor, and Lafayette is the leader of the people from ago, which means to lead to, okay, which means the people, and in our case, armed people. Or we're talking about lavaguetas, okay. HMLDJR says a lot of screwy ideas starting to creep in. Yeah, I think it's time to we entered the black hole of speculation, I guess. So I think it's best to leave it at that. I think we should be back with another episode fresh on Saturday, on Sunday for sure, possibly on Saturday, but on Sunday for sure. It might be on the Cyclades, it might be something else. I need to do my little research for that to see what episode I can do considering the time frame. So we'll be back in a few days. And I'd like to thank to everybody for showing up. Um, We did divert from the topic significantly at the end. This is, after all, the armies of the Trojan War. But I think at the end of each episode, there's a room for a casual talk, maybe. Let the chat come up with whatever topics, whatever theories, and we'll move on. With that being said, Luis Aldami says, I feed from linguists. Armenian is also influenced by Urartian, okay, Urartu, the historical kingdom, and other substrates, and has evolved for 2,500 years. So yes, I am not an expert in linguistics by any chance, by any in any case, not a linguist myself, not overly interested in that beyond. The topic of history that's relevant to stuff that we do. I mean, it is relevant anyway, but I'm more on the historical side. And all right, well, with that being said, I'd like to thank to everybody for being here. Nicolaus is here. He says good night and thank you. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for everybody. Thank you to everybody for showing up. And yeah, this was a late night episode. It's 2.5 hours. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you very much. Have a good night.